on there securely because we scuffed it. The solder's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to break off. And what I'm going to do now is drop some solder on the ends of these wires. I call it tinning. Coat those wires in solder. And then when you're ready, we just touch those two wires to the adapter plug, heat them up, and solder should melt together on both ends. Now these wires are copper already. We don't have to sand the wires down. The solder is going to melt right into the copper. And there's a little too much exposed on one end. I'm going to cut it a little short. There might be some stray wires hanging off the edge. Just make sure everything's nice and clean. You don't want any short circuit here. And this is the product we're going to get. Camera doesn't like to focus unless I put my hand as a background. So there you have it. Now we need a little bit of a thinner wire to go under the wide heat shrink tubing. And you'll see how this works after we get everything on there. Well, we found a good piece of heat shrink tubing that'll fit over the inside wires there. Cut it to a reasonable size. Slip it on before you do any soldering to the adapter plug, otherwise it will not fit. Okay, we're going to get out the voltmeter here. And we're going to just find out which pin is positive and which pin is negative on the adapter plug. Because on the power adapter, that one with the white shielding is positive and the one that's bare is negative. That's your ground. So we just need to make sure they get matched up properly. And we went ahead and soldered those wires now to the adapter plug. Just finishing that up. And I want to hold it in front of the camera and show you exactly what we did. And this is our product at this point. It's very important that those two wires are not touching, or any frayed part of the wire is touching the other part of the wire. It will create a direct short circuit, and we don't want that. Let's do a little cleaning up here. I'm going to do a little cleaning up. It's a smart thing to do when you're done working with your tools and materials, put them back in the same spot you got them in. Don't just keep a big pile. Keep your space clean. You can get more done that way. Now what we're going to do is take some electrical tape here, and we're going to wind it around those wires that we just soldered, just to make sure that they stay separated and they're insulated. And I'll show you what I'm doing as soon as we get that back in the frame. We got the electrical tape around the two wires, and then we pushed up the heat shrink tubing over those two wires. The smaller heat shrink tubing, and then we take the thicker heat shrink tubing and we put it over the adapter plug. Now we're going to take our voltmeter before we do anything and before we seal up the heat shrink tubing and test the power adapter. Make sure that we're getting the proper voltage through it. And it goes right to about 19 volts, which is what we want, so we know our connections are okay. Now, because I don't have a heat gun or a lighter, I'm actually going to use the barrel of my soldering iron to melt the heat shrink tubing. Not the most optimum thing to do in the world, but it's workable in a bind, and it gives you a nice even, shrinking of the tubing, which is what we want. So once we get the inner part melted, we do the same thing to the outer part. Try not to keep the soldering iron on the heat shrink tubing at one place one time for too long. It'll burn and it won't smell real good either. I'm going to speed this up for you guys.